I was reading in the Yoga Sutras, and I see we're coming up now in Book 2. No, we're in Sadhanapada. We're going to be talking about the yamas and the niyamas in the coming weeks. But before we get to that topic, the namas, which, it's a topic everybody associates with Raja Yoga, with Ashtanga Yoga, eight-limbed yoga. And when we speak about Yoga Sutras, oftentimes that's often what comes to people's mind. First off is talking about the yamas and niyamas, foundation, stone, platform of the study of yoga. But there are a number of topics, a couple of stray topics that I would like to finish talking about before we get to that larger subject, because it helps us understand. We have to have a right foundation when we're speaking about those qualities or those attitudes or approaches to life. We have to have a certain, they're built upon a certain understanding. And a couple of those, some of those I'd like to just talk about today, and you might finish some of the discussion that's been going on over the last few weeks, one of which is karma. What Master said about karma, he says, karma, karma, karma. Everybody talks about karma, in other words, they're usually talking in the terms of, oh, I have such bad karma, or oh, things are going terrible, must be my karma. Well, yeah, of course, it is your karma, but I have noticed something in life, though. And I think if you look in your life, your situation, we all have karma. And we've got this karma built up from incarnations and incarnations from the past that is buried there somewhere very deeply in our history or subconscious, or deep in the spine, in this astral body. And I've noticed that I've had times in my life where I've been like, let's take finances for example, but you could apply this beyond finances. But I think we all can relate to it on financial level. When I was a student in college, I was poor as a church mouse. I didn't have anything, but I got through college, worked my way through college, and and I was very happy. It was finances was always a struggle, getting month to month and working one's way, and what am I going to do? But I have to say, when I look back, it was a challenge. And my friends and fellow, struggling students, we were all banded together. And I was not the only one. We were many of us in that same situation. And some of you probably went to school and, you went month to month trying to get through the month. And then I noticed also there were students there who had perhaps came from wealthier families than I. And they never had that problem particularly, but I can't say that they were happier than me. Now, of course, they had material possessions that perhaps I envied them for or wanted also. But in terms, if you look at happiness, were they really any happier than I was? I don't think so. And if you look through, as you grow up, you go out into the world and you look at countries in the world today. You have rich countries. And you have lesser rich countries, poor countries. And I think once a person gets to a certain level of material security, obviously you can't get to that point where things are really dire and it just really totally affects your consciousness, because you're so struggling just to get by in life that you can't pay any attention to higher values, higher aspirations, inner, finer feelings. But once you get beyond a certain point, are the rich countries necessarily happier than poor countries? Measures of happiness don't seem to indicate that at all. And so so who has the better karma, you could say? And I think when we look at karma in that way, karma is those things that are outside of ourselves. When we can have tremendous amount of karma that's going to affect us adversely, you might say, but are those people prevented from, or if that's us, is that going to prevent me from finding God? Poor people can find God. Rich people can find God. Now, yes, I do say, and there is a level which we have to reach to some degree to be able to free ourselves up, to be able to dedicate ourselves, because it does, to make spiritual progress, it does take time. But in terms of happiness, I'm not so sure that, and it seems to me that a better measure of whether one is happy or not is the direction that we're going. Because remember, and this is, I'm going to probably say this again in the future too, our goal here is to attain that state of Jivan Mukta, where we're not attached to this ego identity. It does not mean getting rid of all of our karma. At that stage, yes, ultimately we have to transcend all karma. But what we're looking for to live a life in God does not, we can have plenty of bad karma. Whether we have a lots or little, it doesn't matter. And all of us, thinking of all the lifetimes we have, we all probably have a lot. That is not going to stop us from attaining our divine goal. What's going to is, and so it comes down, you could say, to the direction that we are pointing. And you find, if you look in a person's life, a person who is, and you could say that, maybe you could say it's attitude too, but in the direction that you're moving, a person can be have rich, wonderful outward circumstantial karma, but if they're pointing in a negative direction, they're unhappy. I mean, if their attitude is one of unenthusiastic, low energy, not positive, restless, these are the types of things that make a person unhappy. But if a person has tremendously difficult karma, but yet they're aspiring, and they're positive, they're energetic, they're enthusiastic, even though they're burdened with tremendous circumstantial karma, you find that that person is much more likely to be happy. And it's like a magnet, and we talk about this, a bar magnet. There's a positive and there's a negative pole on that magnet. And wherever if you have a bar magnet and you cut the magnet in half, well, throw the one half away, the remaining half, you still got a positive and negative pole, no matter where you cut the magnet. And so there's always a positive pole. And so everybody, wherever their circumstantial situation is, there's always going to be a positive pole to aspire to. So in what direction are we pointed? And you find, if you look at your own life, remember, I would suspect, I certainly remember for myself, remember when you maybe first came on to approach these teachings. You read the autobiography of a yogi, you took a class, or you met somebody, or whatever it might be. You had that, oh, look, and it somehow it vibrated with you. You said, oh, that's for me. And remember that enthusiasm you had at that time? Oh, and there was a happiness. And it had nothing to do with your outward circumstances. It was what awoke within you. So in a sense, you could say the spiritual, its progress and the spiritual path is not measured particularly by outward circumstances. It's that direction that we're pointing ourselves, and that's where our happiness comes, our enthusiasm comes, is making sure we're in that direction. So keeping that, and eventually, of course, we could sum that up by saying the attitude that we bring to our karma is going to be the determining factor whether it's good or bad karma. And I wanted to start by reading one of the sutras, and I'm going to read Swami's interpretation here as well, because he basically sums this up. And I want to keep that thought in mind as we go forward. When we start talking about yama niyama, we're going to be talking here, we're really talking about directional attitudes that were, and not the static situation that we find ourselves in. because everybody's different. Everybody's going to be approaching this the same in their own unique way. But what way are we pointing? So we have here book 2, number 14. The fruits of one's past actions bring pleasure or pain according to their quality, whether they are uplifting or degrading. So Swamiji, because he says this better than I, or he put it this way, he says it more concisely than me. Good or bad karma is determined not by any social code of behavior, but only according to the simple criterion. Will it uplift your consciousness toward God or draw it further downward, away from the remembrance of Him? The deeds themselves are less important than the intentions behind those deeds. You may have given away fortunes in charity, but if you did it with the hope of impressing others, the outer benefits of that generosity will be balanced against the egoistic intentions. It is always good to do good, even for selfish reasons, but it's far better to do good in the spirit of genuine kindliness. But that's, in a sense, he's referencing there. So let's sum that up. In what direction are we headed? And we often ask ourselves, am I making spiritual progress? Well, it's not what you accomplished or what powers that we've gained. It's spiritual progress is measured. Are we able to attain the attitude of upward aspiration and that positive direction in front of us? And the outward things will take care of themselves. To maintain that sense of maintaining that attitude is really the determining factor in a devotee's spiritual progress, not the outward manifestations of that so much. Those, you could say, will take care of themselves. And we do this, and this applies to the reaping of karma. People who complain about having bad karma or feel satisfied when they reap so-called good karma, it's our reaction to that determines whether it's good or bad. And I think by now we all understand this. You could say it's one person's joy is another person's disappointment. Same thing happens in how we react in different ways. But to sum that up, that point is we want to measure sometimes, and there's a way to measure, decide our actions. And you could say one way to measure is, does something bring us closer to our divine goal, or does it pull us further away? And so when we're acting in life and we're making our choices in life, this is how we need to measure it. Is what happens outwardly, is it taking us into something? Is it spurring us to the right spirit in life, or is it stimulating something that's negative or downward attitude? And sometimes we need to remember this, is when we encounter things that seemingly are, oh, I have such bad karma. But there is a story that Swami Kriyananda told years ago. He would bring up. He met a family. I think it was in Delhi, but he was visiting this family that had a daughter that was a very saintly person, and this girl at a young age decided that all she wanted in life was to know God. And if you had a child like that, you'd kind of wonder, because what she did is she basically went into her bedroom and he closed the door, and she wouldn't come out ever. She just stayed there in seclusion. Now you think, if you're a parent, you'd be worried about that. But she was actually, after some time, she actually was sincere. And what she would do, she spent her days in prayer. She would pray for people. And in time, people began to recognize that her prayers seemed to be effective. And they helped people. And many people, they would come to the house, and she would stay in her room, she would people, I guess, would communicate with her, and she would pray for them. And they would be well, and things would go well. And she became quite renowned for this. But she had a father. Her father was sickly. And the family, the mother and the other siblings, kept asking her to pray for the father. But she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. She wouldn't pray for herself. She wouldn't pray for the father. But the family just harassed her, you might say, and would not stop. And so until finally she said, okay, I'll pray for the father. And he says, but you'll see what happens. And so she did. She prayed for the father for the physical healing to overcome the malady, whatever it was. And the father got well. Well, within a short time, the father had this propensity for alcohol. And when he was very ill, he wasn't drinking. But when he became well, he started drinking. And he was alcoholic. And pretty soon he started spending all the family's money. And he would running around doing all sorts of unhealthy things. And ultimately led a very dissipated life and sank into a very low state. And the daughter finally says, you see what happened here? And now his karma was to be ill and sickly, but it had kept him, you might say, these other stronger propensities that he had in life, it was keeping him from expressing them. You might say protecting him in a way so that he didn't, maybe the divine plan had been for a series of time would go by where he would naturally overcome those by refraining from those in this lifetime. But being released from the chains that were holding him back from expressing those negative qualities, he indulged them and just made them worse. And of course, made everybody else in the family's life worse too. So you could see, we can't judge whether something comes to us, whether it's a good karma or bad karma. And I think that was sometimes Master was saying, karma, karma, karma. Maybe what we've inherited and whatever karma, maybe it's for our good if we look at it. Now I know, that's in America, that's called being a Pollyanna. No matter what happens, it's all for the good, and it can be a little irritating when somebody reminds you that when something, you've just stubbed your toe. Oh, it's all for your good. You kind of want to, you don't like to hear that. But on the other hand, maybe there's we have to be detached. It's neither good. It's neither good nor bad in the ultimate sense. Doesn't mean we have to enjoy negative things, but moderate ourselves. We don't know the lesson. If we can extract the positive lessons, say, okay, this is what's happened. Now I'm going to use it and go forward. And the other thing that in that reading that was Swamiji was making, even when we do make mistakes, make bad judgments, that the intentions behind those outward actions are usually much more important than the actual action itself. And this, in whatever, if we have an intention of offering ourselves and an intention of serving, intention of being helpful, and it goes awry, which this life is like that, it's the intentions that matter. And so consequently, this is what Swamiji is referring in that reading, that if we're wealthy and we give, but it's for egoistic purposes, it has very little value. Serving just for outer form, what it looks like, this means nothing in the scheme of things. Now, as he says, it's better to do that than to not, because ultimately if we keep trying, you keep trying, we ultimately do better. But oftentimes, I think all of us to some degree, I know I do a good deed and I kind of become proud of my humility, you might say, the good deed. And there's a little spark of it and I go, oh, I don't want that to be there. But yet, sometimes you say, oh yeah, it made, I did the right thing. What a good boy am I. Well, ideally, I wouldn't be thinking that way. But yet, it's better to do a good deed than no deed at all. But ultimately, it's the intention and this is not an excuse. The road to hell is said to be paved with good intentions. We have to learn. The important thing is if when we do a wrong deed, something that turned out to be a disaster, our intention was honorable, but we should learn the lesson. It's not an excuse to repeat the wrong action. We need to learn, or else, yes, we do ultimately get the negative karma from that. And so the principle of what I'm emphasizing here, which underlies what we're going to be talking about when we do get to speaking about the yamas and yamas, is the direction. In what way are we going? Are we expansive? Even and all of life has a direction. To think in terms of, I think, to live in life without any sense of direction, I think even we can see that life itself has a direction. We're trying to expand, to live more joyfully. If we look more closely, we find that a direction is greater awareness, a sense of expansion, a sense of inclusiveness of other people. This is what life is about, and it underlies the whole evolutionary experience of life. Now, even I think an atheist who believes there's no divinity to it, at least I think we can observe that there is a direction in life toward greater awareness, wanting to enjoy. Even amoeba wants to enjoy food. Get more food and prosper, to propagate. There is a direction in that sense, but toward underlying that there's also a direction toward greater expansion, greater joy, greater happiness, a greater sense of self-awareness. This is what we're all aiming at. And this also underlies a discussion that is implicit when we speak about the Yoga Sutras. It's also in the Bhagavad Gita. There's a philosophical system that accompanies this known as Sankhya Yoga philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, that takes this concept of directionality and applies it to life in terms of the qualities of life, the gunas. And this is something that the Yoga Sutras, they don't go into the gunas extensively. They make reference to it. There's a understanding, you might say. It's understood. People understood the idea of the gunas, the qualities, the directional perfecting of different qualities that we have in order that accompany spiritual development. And as we know, and I think all of you are experienced to know a little bit about the gunas, the sattva, raja, and tamo guna that underlie this philosophical system of Sankhya philosophy. And Master himself often spoke in terms of life is like a wave. It's a wave, everything vibrates. And in a wave, you have an upward flow of the wave. It's rising up, and you have a downward flow of the wave. And everything fluctuates in life. And I think even modern science describes life, this universe, as a wave, that everything fluctuates. And not only in matter, in terms of the vibration of waves, but in terms of consciousness itself. So everything's a wave. There's high points, there's the low points, and everything ultimately comes to a point of balance. And that when we live in this outward world of duality, everything fluctuates. This is the very nature of duality, is the wave motion of the pleasure, pain, joy, suffering, which is inevitable when our consciousness is identified with this outward creation. And behind it all, and you could say philosophically, the gunas relate to that, is the perfecting ourselves, the perfecting the qualities that are inherent in nature itself, and perfecting those qualities that are within ourselves as well, is to purify those, you could say, those qualities that are inherent in each one of us. And again, like a magnet, there's in every quality, no matter where we are on the spectrum of perfecting those qualities within ourselves, inherent wherever we are, there's always the opposite. Tamoguna, Rajaguna, Sattvaguna is inherent in no matter where we are on the spiritual spectrum of development. A person could be very, very saintly in their behavior, but yet there is the potential, even in the most pure expression of that, of tamoguna, of the downward direction. But it's relative. And when we speak of life as directional, this relativity comes into play. Swami used to use the example all the time of, take a person like Gandhi. He was a very saintly man and many qualities. But for him, you might say, being lazy, and if Gandhi should get up one morning and be lazy, oh, I don't want to get up in the morning. To him, maybe instead of getting up at 4 o'clock or whatever time he got up, 3 o'clock in the morning, he says, I'm going to sleep in till 4:30. Because there was a little impulse to be, oh, I think I'm going to do that. That's tamoguna. Expressed now, we would say, my gosh, he gets up at 4:30 instead of 4 every morning. Today he's overslept by 15 minutes. We'd hardly consider that a fault. And yet, if a person extremely elevated, even a little thing and if you're that person, even that little bit of going in that direction, it's a little bit painful. To a saintly person, just a little bit of moving in a negative direction, oh, it stirs something. Oh, that didn't feel right. In other words, it was pointing in a negative direction. And this is how we judge our actions, whether it's something good or bad. In what direction is it taking us? Now, of course, if you're a worldly person who's very worldly and he's very lazy, and if he should decide, I'm going to, instead of getting up at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, I'm going to get up a little bit earlier. I'm going to get up at 8 and I'm going to meditate a little bit. I'm going to sit quietly for 5 minutes. Well, that would be tremendous. That's a very sattvic action for him. But now it wouldn't be for Gandhi, you see, or for it. It's all very relative, and the important thing is in what direction are we pointed. And of course, the gunas express that. These waves of, you could say, sattva guna being the high point, and down in the trough, the tamasic tendencies that pull us into darkness, this play of darkness and light. And this, when we come to the yamas and the niyamas, we begin to, for example, we talk about ahimsa, nonviolence. We have to measure it very differently. And there's a relativity to these qualities, these yamas. There's a relativity to it. In what direction are we pointed? And we find ourselves, if we're moving in that positive direction that's going to purify us, remove those impurities that obscure our vision, our awareness, that keep our awareness contracted, we find that little bit of removal of those impurities causes us to be happy, to joyful. And this is the direction that we want to go. Now, one of the elements of seeing life in terms of direction is, I think it's a much more positive way to look at life, is there's no universal good or bad in terms of values. To try to imply, in other words, to apply a value across all people in all society it's not meant, it doesn't work that way. In other words, there's a certain relativity to, and we recognize that what a child does is not judged in the same way as what an adult does. But in the same way, ignorance of one adult versus ignorance of another adult, we have to see people that they just don't understand. And I think of that. Uh, we have to see people that don't see light. They live in darkness. It's not a matter that that person in darkness is inherently bad or they're negative in some way. It's just that they're ignorant. They haven't been able to see the light. And so what can you expect of somebody who's ignorant? You hope that they are able to rise up. And so you approach them and you try to help other people according to their level of awareness, their level of ability to receive what you have. In the Bible, Christ says, don't cast pearl before swine, not because he had something against swine, but he was saying we have to reach people according to the level and of where they're at, and we have to have that same understanding of ourselves. We're going to be able to understand things according to our own level of consciousness, our own level of awareness, and depending upon the qualities that each of us have. So if we look at life in this way, I think it helps us. We can't other people to be able to be appropriate to what other people can receive when we give advice to other people, and look to see if you want to help other people, in what direction are they moving. You can't give the highest of truths to somebody who has no concept of them, but you can give them something that's a little bit more than where they are right now. And I think just as we approach that for other people, think of that also for ourselves. We sometimes feel that, oh, I'm such a failure. I haven't reached the greatest heights. But did we do a little bit more today than we did yesterday? Did we do a little bit, be kind to oneself as well. See oneself in terms of directional movement. In which way are we moving? And I think in even the most sattvic person, there's always an element that they could move in the opposite direction, because only God is the only thing that's absolute. And until we reach that point where we're in God, there's always going to be this play of positive and negative within us. And so when you feel that you're slipping, or when that something's gone wrong, it's not absolutely that you're a bad person because you've moved in the wrong direction. It's just a reminder. I think, and this is why I think that sometimes when negative things happen to it, don't think in terms of the outward form. Think in terms of what it's offering us, in terms of a lesson to turn ourselves and move in that direction that ultimately takes us to what's called triguna rahitam, beyond the three gunas. This is what we want to all of us achieve. Now, this is something that the practical application of this is to always ask ourselves, in whatever the actions are, whatever happens to us, whatever the karma comes, in what direction is it taking us? And this is the mark of Jnana Yoga. This is really what Jnana Yoga is about. And using life as a guide, in what direction? Learning to discriminate. And discriminate is that action, this action, is it what is right, what is wrong? Now, humanity, society likes to think the action itself is inherently right or inherently wrong, and that's not really the way it is. Action is right or wrong if it's taking us in a good direction, in the right direction. Now, there are better and best, of course. This is a better direction than that. But is it moving? Is it, by doing that, it's going to take me to my ultimate goal? Is it going to take me to joy? is it going to take me, or at least in that direction, is it going to take me to expansion? If we use that as our guide, or as Swami Kriyananda used to say, let joy be your guide. But you really can't do that unless you have some experience of what joy is. We have to experience what expansion feels like. We have to experience what love feels like, or peace, or calmness. We have to experience those. And that's why we meditate. That's why we serve. That's why we do all of these outward things of the spiritual path, is in order to gain some experience so that we can use that as our measuring stick if we're making spiritual progress, not what happens outside of ourselves. Now, I will caution, though, we have to be aware and to see how our actions affect the world around us, because the world itself is a sounding board. Isn't that so? So consequently, we may be thinking we're doing it felt really great, we're doing the right thing, but it caused pain and suffering to those around us. Now, obviously, that seems to overturn everything I've said. My intention was so good. Well, yes, it's good. It's right to have a good intention, but we do have to measure our intentions and our actions against what happens around us. And then from that, we learn to do the better job next time. So yes, we have to use this world as a sounding board, but yet it starts within ourselves. I feel I'm moving in a direction that is going to be expansive and it's joyful. But we have to experience what really is joy. It's not pleasure. It's not just circumstantial happiness. It's something self-generated within the heart, within ourselves. It's calm, it's peaceful, it's expansive, it's inclusive. And that's why we meditate. And that in time becomes our guide in concert with the results it has, not only upon us, but also has on the world around us. And so anyway, this is using Let Joy Be Your Guide. And with that foundation, then let's take the discussion to the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs that Patanjali is very famous, and then the Yoga Sutras are very famous for. And then next week, we're going to we'll start diving into the yamas and the niyamas with this as our foundation. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to look in my chat box here before I sign off. Okay, intention behind very good point on the intention behind the actions are more important, without expecting recognition or benefits. Please throw light on doing charity donations where we get benefits of Texas sessions. Many NGOs, also WOs, probable donor, etc., etc. Even though primary intent is to help and support the needy, on the back of the mind, yes, I understand. But then again, it's better to do it than to not do it. Now you could say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take. Yeah, okay. That is your choice. But I think you're encouraging. I think it's an encouragement to do good. And yes, we should do it, not for selfish reasons. But it's up to each individual, and we have to realize we're all on a different level. And so if you get a benefit from it, well, how you approach that, it's your choice. And I think we know what the purest form would be, but we live in a muddy world where everything is shades of gray. And so you do as you feel best. What gives you joy? How do you feel about it? And like I say, it's better to do some good, even with a little selfish motive, than no good at all. But if you can do it purely in your own mind, you be practical in your idealism, and eventually, of course, be beyond it. And so I leave it to you. And I think we all understand the point. That was a good question because it relates to everybody. If anybody who's made a donation and taken a tax write-off, I think understands the subtle temptations there. So thank you. Anyway, let's come back next week and we're going to talk about yamas and niyamas. And joy to you and have a wonderful, wonderful week. God bless.